How are mutants classified in the Marvel Comics, and who are some of the most notable from each and every category? Now that Deadpool and Wolverine has hit theaters, the future of mutants in the MCU is looking more and more promising. In the main timeline, we saw a few characters like Kamala Khan and Namor be revealed to be mutants, and we've seen before multiversal variants of Professor Xavier and Hank McCoy, otherwise known as Beast, but we haven't seen any major promises of significant long-term mutant involvement until recently. Now that Deadpool has been inducted into the MCU, this is likely to change as soon as Deadpool ends up landing on Earth 616 permanently. So, now that mutant classification is more important than ever, what are the classifications of mutants in the category, and let's break down the nuances of each and every one of them. Before we begin though, we have one small disclaimer. It's important to mention that this concept is fluid across not just the multiverse, but also on Earth 616. So with some mutants, there's a little bit of wiggle room regarding where they may fall, but we'll break down the basic concepts with several examples given. The mutant classification system takes into account two basic factors when organizing mutants, and that is the magnitude of their power in a physical sense, as well as their experience and mastery over that ability, which also takes into account how well they're able to control their mutant power. And because of this, it's actually possible for a mutant to switch and change ranks with their power set, as that is ever changing as they become more and more dangerous and learn from practice and experience. Lower level mutants are not mentioned often, but Epsilon class is usually the designation given to mutants who either don't have a tangible use for their power or are actively hindered by their mutations rather than aided by them. We know that mutations are not always inherently beneficial, and while some mutants like Storm or Jean Grey can perform amazing feats with their powers, many mutants are not so lucky. One example of an Epsilon level mutant is Barnell Bowhusk, otherwise known as Beak. Beak's mutation is fairly simple. He developed an avian physiology complete with hollow bones, feathers, down to his body, and of course, a beak. Since Beak has the intellect of a regular human, he could interact with regular society however he wished, which meant that he didn't really need a beak. In the wild, birds develop beaks in order to reach and capture food, but since Bowhusk was just a walk from the grocery store and able to buy his own food, he didn't have any use for his deformity, and therefore didn't learn how to fly until he joined Professor X in his school. Unfortunately for many, the reality of an Epsilon level mutant is that their mutation do more intrinsic harm to them than good, and this is probably the most tragic classification of any mutant. We know that in X Factor Annual number 5, Franklin Richards uses the term first level mutant as a derogatory term in order to make fun of several members of the X-Men, which may indicate that a first level mutant is actually a qualification in itself, but it's not been seen much outside of this one particular instance and moment. We can infer that since it's an insult, it means someone who is inexperienced and relatively useless. But on Earth 616, the Greek alphabet is more commonly used, and we don't hear much of first level mutants as a title. One step above an Epsilon level mutant though is the Delta class, and the major difference between Epsilon and Delta is that Deltas don't have any active hindrances, but they also don't have much of a benefit from their mutation either. Their mutations almost always wind up being only slightly beneficial in very specific circumstances, or more likely, they're just docile. Delta mutants are not harmed or hindered in any way by their mutations other than societal prejudice. A good example of a Delta class mutant is Domino, since her mutation protects her from being unlucky, but she can't do very much with this power. She's still a normal person with the limits of a normal human body as well as mind. She can't move buildings or lift cars or change the weather, so as a superhero, there's not a ton that she can do, but she can look at her phone while crossing the street and probably be just fine, so she's a Delta level mutant. These deltas are believed to make up almost half of the entire mutant population, and as the largest population of mutants, many deltas can fly under the radar completely unnoticed. In fact, many times, they do not even learn that they have mutations until much later in their lives. But someone on this level is highly unlikely to become an X-Men or a superhero, with Domino being a big exception. It's completely possible for a Delta to live a completely normal life without anyone ever knowing that there was anything special about them. Gammas, however, which is the next level up, are defined by not just the power of their mutation, but are marked by either a lack of control over this mutation, or a significant physical deformity or inhuman appearance. Before gaining full control of their power, Rogue was considered a Gamma level mutant because she was extremely powerful but had no way to aim or control that mutation. She was a danger to others and not just herself, which was the difference between her and an Epsilon class mutant. As difficult as Beak's life was, it was not harmful to anyone around him like Rogue clearly is. Skin-to-skin contact with Rogue will automatically cause her to leech a person's life force, powers, memories, and strength, with this potentially killing them in the process. This isn't something that she can willingly do anything about though, and she has always had to make sure that her skin was covered. Many Gamma level mutants are physically deformed in some way, and they cannot control when they activate or deactivate their mutation. Someone like Storm or Professor X can turn their powers on and off at will. But not every mutant gets that luxury, and most of them belong in this Gamma level territory. Gamma level mutants are highly dangerous and require some of the most intense monitoring of any other mutant category for their volatility, especially in the case of someone like Rogue, who can unwillingly harm others around them. If a mutation does have a practical application though, then it will go as a beta class mutant, such as Nightcrawler or Beast. For these examples, they still can't turn their abilities on or off, or they have no conscious control over their appearances, but their mutations do give them an edge in other areas. Their strength, speed, and agility is usually elevated comparatively speaking, so if a mutant has a significant advantage in some facet of life as a result of their mutation, they are likely considered a beta class. Someone like Cyclops is actually up for debate as where he falls in classification. Cyclops cannot control his power or turn it on and off, but he does have a specialized visor that allows him to live a relatively normal life, and uses his powers extremely well. He has also demonstrated mastery over his optic blasts and can use them in tandem with other skills, so some may consider Scott to be either an alpha or a beta level mutant, depending on how severely his handicaps is taken into account. By the strictest definition though, Scott's inability to remove his visor is still an impediment, so the letter of the law would call him a beta, but the spirit of the law may not be firm. Alphas, however, have almost no drawbacks to their abilities, or have been able to mitigate the flaws of their powers to an unrecognizable degree. These are mutants like Storm and Professor Xavier, who have complete control over their abilities, and use them when and where they want to. The most important factor separating alpha and beta level mutants is experience and master over something that can be activated or deactivated at will. Professor X has spent decades honing his skills, and Storm has an unrivaled level of precision that she's developed over years of practice. Since they have no hindrances, they are alphas, but that's still not the highest level of mutant in the pecking order. Perhaps the most famous classification of mutant is the infamous Omega level mutant, which has one defining characteristic. Someone is defined as an Omega level mutant if there is no conceivable way to measure or predict the limits of their power. And this is where we get some of the most powerful mutants in all of comics. These are the likes of Magneto and Jean Grey, who can theoretically continue pushing the limits of their powers to an unknown extent. And telepaths are particularly notorious here. Omega level telepaths and telekinetics like Jean operate under the assumption that her mind control theoretically can have limitless reach around the planet or even beyond, and Jean has not demonstrated any significant limitation that leads to a concrete answer regarding where her power may stop. Magneto similarly has mastery over all electromagnetic fields, and he's been able to even manipulate cosmic metals such as Uru, so there is no way to put a theoretical limit on Magneto either. There are, however, a few select mutants who have been called beyond Omega level, and these are the most powerful mutants that have ever lived. On 616, this includes the likes of Franklin Richards, who is regularly cited as the most powerful mutant in all of comics. So the idea that someone can be elevated beyond Omega level is exceedingly rare. But anyway friends, what do you think of the mutant classification system? Where would you place some of the more ambiguous mutants like Cyclops or Wolverine? And what would you like to see from the MCU iteration of the X-Men moving forward? As always, Hulk smash that subscribe button to see more, and I hope you're having an absolutely wonderful day.